Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today with Sky Island Alliance and a discussion on water law. We're so excited to have you with us. As folks are still joining, I know it's going to take some time to get everyone in. This is a very, very popular talk. Go ahead and let us know in the chat where you're joining us from. I'm joining you all from Tucson, Arizona. My name is Sarah Truby, and I am the Habitat Conservation Manager with Sky Island Alliance. We got some folks from Tucson, some folks from Bisbee, Tinca Verde. Very exciting, a lot of folks from Tucson. Oh, and from Hermosillo, bienvenido. From New Mexico, that's great. I was really excited when I looked at the list of folks registered that we had people from all over the US joining us to learn about our Arizona water laws down here. So once again, I'm joining you from Tucson, Arizona, where Sky Island Alliance, our office sits on the lands of the Tohono O'odham, Pascua Yaqui, and additional indigenous peoples. If you'd like to learn more about these lands, my colleague Rick will be posting a link in the chat for you to learn more. I also want to acknowledge that over the past few months, over the summer, we've had 26 new volunteers join us, both for our BioBlitz earlier in the spring, as well as various weekends in Aravaipa and some other projects that we've had going this summer. I'm going to really quickly read their names aloud, and I'm hoping that we can give them all a visual round of Zoom applause or emoji reacts or whatever floats your fancy. So thank you very much to Adam, Alfonso, Brooke, Carol, Chris, Christina, Clint, Daniel, Dugan, Jerry, Greg, Jacob, Joseph, Judy, Kathy, Kyle, Lee, Liza, Mark, Marissa, Michelle, Pat, Becca, Richard, and Trom. Thank you all so much for your wonderful work over the past few months joining us out in the field. And those are all our first-time volunteers, I should say. We've also had our typical, very, very dedicated volunteers joining us out there, and many thanks to all of you as well. Finally, I do want to thank the Cornell Douglas Foundation for supporting our water work and Spring Seeker for the past year. They've done a fantastic job supporting us, including this talk. So I want to bring us back to the topic at hand. I'm excited to introduce Michael Van Alsberg. Michael has been on the board of directors for Sky Island Alliance for approximately 6 years, and he's currently the co-chair of the board. Michael's day job is practicing law in Tucson in the areas of corporate, real estate, water law, and municipal law. Michael grew up in Southern Arizona and loves the Sky Island region like many of us. And today, Michael will introduce us to the laws that protect water here in Arizona. As a reminder, we're going to ask everybody to stay muted during the talk. If you have any questions, please feel free to paste them into the chat. And then at the end of the talk, we'll get to those and we'll ask Michael those questions. I still see a couple of people joining, so I want to give like another 30 seconds, but let's go ahead and take it away, Michael.
Good deal. Good. Sarah, you can hear me okay?
You sound great. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. So I'm going to try not to repeat what Sarah said, but good morning, everybody, and thanks for attending. Sky Island Alliance is an amazing organization, and I know that because I've been intricately involved for the last 6 years on the board, have been the treasurer, and am now the co-chair with Pam Rossiter. I've been an attorney in Tucson for a little over 25 years, mostly real estate law and business law. Did some work in juvenile law, have done criminal law work, etc. I jumped into the water law arena about 10 years ago. So I'm no expert compared to a lot of other water lawyers in the state of Arizona. But I've been working in that field for enough time to get my feet wet. I'm literally learn new things every day in water law. It is a fascinating area of the law. It's constantly changing and it's very complex and rich. Well, what does all that mean? That means I'm probably going to get something wrong. Don't hold me to it. My opinions are not necessarily those of Sky Island Alliance or other water lawyers or hydrologists or experts, but I'm going to give them to you anyway. So let me share my screen. And Sarah, let me know if that worked out.
Yeah, that looks great.
Great, good deal. What is water law? It's a big area of law. It impacts everybody. It's from water rights to utilities to effluent, water quality, water treatment issues, Waters of the United States, which is regulation of navigable waterways, streambed ownership, water harvesting issues, permitting, Clean Water Act. It's a massive area of law. It impacts everybody. Today, I'm mostly going to be focusing on water rights, which is what's your legal right in the state of Arizona to take or appropriate and use water in the state. I'm not going to focus on water quality issues and those regulations, which is a huge area. We did have a previous coffee break on that. Go check it out. That was a great one too. I'm going to try to leave a couple minutes for questions at the end. And Sarah can share my email if anybody has any issues that they really want to chat about. Another little caveat is there's going to be I'm going to oversimplify some stuff perhaps. Some of these issues are complex, and you might see things on slides that I bounce over if we run short on time. And Sarah, if a question pops up that you see in the chat that's something that you think needs to be answered on the spot, feel free to stop me. So Arizona Water Law 101 in less than an hour. The main topics I'm going to touch are Colorado River, which I wasn't going to talk about, but it is the elephant in the room in this state. Groundwater law, surface water law, and federal reserved rights. It's important that you kind of focus on these different topics because when a water law or a water issue comes up, it's typically going to fall into one or both or three or one of these areas, and it makes it easier to think about if you compartmentalize it. So it's easier, like I said, if an issue comes up, you go, hey, that's a groundwater law issue. You should look at that area of law or hire a lawyer that works in that specific area of law. Here's some TLAs and other acronyms that I'm going to be talking about a little bit today and things that are important in water law. 3-letter acronym is TLA. I thought that was funny. Anyway, the AF acre feet, you're going to hear that a lot. It's about 326,000 gallons. Most of water law in the state is focused on or talks about water in that quantity. We don't talk about gallons, we talk about acre feet. And you'll see thousands of acre feet, which is abbreviated as KAF, MAF, millions of acre feet. We're going to talk a little bit about the ADWR, which is the big dog in Arizona in regard to water regulation, and that's the Arizona Department of Water Resources. And then when we get into groundwater stuff, we're going to talk about active management areas, irrigation non-expansion areas, and assured water supply, which has to do with development and towns. But it's just to kind of give you a little preview of that. So where does Arizona's water come from? Our water supply is pretty mixed, but a lot of it comes from the Colorado River, which is one of the reasons I wanted to at least touch on that. 18% of it is in-state rivers, which is surface water, and a lot of that really is the Salt River system that supplies water to Phoenix. Some of it comes from reclaimed water, and a lot of it, the big chunk, comes from groundwater. Where does all our water go? And who uses water in Arizona? Who are the big dogs? Is it cities, towns, houses, factories, mines? It is agriculture. And that may not be a surprise to most people, but this is true in most of the Western United States. The big users of water in this state are ag. 72%. I was actually looking yesterday. Colorado's water use, 90% is agriculture. So it's a big, agriculture is the big guy. And so when you talk about conservation and you talk about, in municipalities, we should save water by doing X, Y, Z. It's, if you really want to save water and we really want to come up with a plan to make sure that we have a sustainable future in water, we've got to bring agriculture into the conversation for sure. Moving on to Colorado River. The Colorado River, the law that surrounds the Colorado River is called the Law of the River. The reason it's called that is because it is a funky combination of compacts between states, case law, treaties between the United States and Mexico, minutes related to those treaties, federal law, state law, and other regulations, including the Bureau of Reclamation is involved in it, et cetera. It's a complicated, confusing, ever-changing, with lots of overlap legal area. It basically, the law of the river basically started in 1922 with the River Compact, which is between all of the states that are part of the Colorado River Basin. There's considered upper basin, lower basin states, and I'll get to that in a second. That compact basically said, hey, there's about 15 million acre feet in the Colorado River every year. We're going to split it between the upper basin and lower basin states. So each one gets about 7.5 million acre feet a year. And the lower basin, upper basin demarcation line is Lee's Ferry. So basically it's Arizona, California, Nevada, lower basin states. Upper basin states are mostly Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, a little bit of New Mexico, but so you split it. We get half, they get half. And then in 1944, we entered into a treaty with Mexico and said Mexico gets 1.5 million acre feet. And so we're talking about now we're at 16.5 million acre feet of the Colorado River is been allocated. And so the reality is we make sure that no water is reaching the Gulf of California. We make sure that, boy, we use all of the Colorado River. It's pretty fascinating, and maybe that's horrific. The Colorado River is kind of the same as Arizona. It's 70% of it goes to agriculture. The biggest user is California. But you have to realize that there's 5.5 million acres of farmland that are farmed using Colorado River water. It's basically why we have produce and lettuce and stuff in the winter. It also, the Colorado River supplies about 40 million people with drinking water. Interesting fact about like Las Vegas as an example is Las Vegas's water supply is almost exclusively Colorado River water. Whereas Arizona, we look back at that, if we look back at that other slide, but we don't have to. Anyway, Arizona is, 30%, but they're probably over 90% in Las Vegas. Colorado River also supplies water to areas in cities that aren't even in the Colorado River Basin, like Denver and Boulder and Albuquerque. This is a map, not a great map, but a map of the lower basin and upper basins showing where the demarcation line is, and you can kind of see where 7.5 million acres go and the other 7.5 million acres go, and then another 1.5. So let's talk about the lower basin states for a second and the allocations. And again, this is all the law of the river that governs who gets what and what those allocations are. In the lower basin, Arizona gets 2.8 million acre feet. Nevada gets 0.3 million acre feet or 300,000 acre feet, which is pretty good that that's not a lot of water for all of Las Vegas. They're pretty good at conservation. California gets 4.4 million acre feet. Mexico gets 1.5 million acre feet. So a total of about 9 million acre feet. California is the biggest user in the basin, and a lot of it is the Imperial Valley of California, along with Los Angeles, et cetera, the municipalities that use the water. But there's a problem. The math. The river, Colorado River, really only produces about 12 to 14 million acre feet of water a year. So 16.5 is what is shared between the upper and lower basin. It's over allocated, and that is what has hit, combined with the fact that we've been in a 20-year mega drought. Since about 2020, the Western United States has been in a pretty significant drought. So the flows in the Colorado River don't match up with what they predicted in the 1920s and 30s and 40s. So we have a problem. Lake Powell and Lake Mead have basically saved the day because they can store many years. When they're both full, I think they can store something around 5 to 10 years of water supply for the Western United States. And so that's why those lakes have now dropped to really low levels. Sometimes you might hear in the news this dead pool phrase. And what that basically means is that if the reservoirs reach dead pool, they can't let water out at all. And so they're being managed, trying to manage both Lake Powell and Lake Mead to make sure they don't reach dead pool. Another factor with the dead pool issue is then they can't, both lakes have significant hydroelectric generation facilities. They won't be able to produce electricity, and that will affect millions of people as well. And one of the things to remember about that is that other than damming beautiful canyons like Glen Canyon, hydroelectric power is about as green as it gets for power generation. So it's important that those lakes stay full and that they're properly managed. So what about the priority of rights as to water that comes down the Colorado River? The Central Arizona Project, which started in the 60s and was finished in the 70s and 80s, supplies a lot of water to Arizona, millions of acre feet a year. What happens when the river doesn't have enough water in it to supply Arizona? Arizona gets cut first. California basically wins. When we came to an agreement and when the federal government approved the Central Arizona Project, Arizona basically made a deal with California and the federal government saying if there was a shortage, CAP would get hit first. And so that's what you see now. How do they decide legally when there's a shortage, who gets hurt in Arizona? There's a tier system that has to do with the CAP. It's a I'm not going to get into a lot of detail on it, but it's a multi-tiered system that says these uses get cut first, and the first to typically get cut is agriculture. Municipalities that get water from the Colorado River through the CAP system are cut last. Although you hear Tucson has agreed to give up certain CAP rights and water, and they're getting paid to do that, but they're not going to get cut unless there was a really bad shortage. So the hardest hit is irrigation and agriculture. As a simple example, there are irrigation districts in Pinal County that, as of about 2 years ago, don't get any more water at all. And they were reliant on 20, 30, 40,000 acre feet of water a year. So those irrigation districts can't produce water to provide water to their farmers. And those farmers are now going back to having to pump groundwater. At the end of the day, the dams are controlled by the Bureau of Reclamation. So from a legal standpoint, if the states can't work out the reduction in the amount of water in the Colorado River, the Bureau of Reclamation is going to tell them what they have to do. And so the Bureau of Reclamation has basically put them on notice, the states on notice, and the states have been working on this for years and years and years, that they got to work out something to prevent these lakes from reaching dead pool and work out something in regard to the fact that the Colorado River's over allocated. So at the end of the day, it's the federal government that's probably going to have a lot of say in what happens with the Colorado River. But on the bright side, right now, the Colorado River is probably in a good spot until 2026 or so. That's what I've been hearing. And that's mostly because last winter was one of the better winters we've ever had. There was, in fact, 11 million acre feet of water has gone into Lake Powell just this year. So both levels in both reservoirs are up a bit. So it bought us some time, but they're going to have to get to the table. Everybody's got to come to the table and figure out what they're going to do long term. All right, moving on to the next bucket of water law, which is Arizona groundwater law. Arizona groundwater law started basically in 1980. That was a big, huge year for Arizona water law. The Arizona Groundwater Management Act was passed in 1980, and it's a very cutting edge legal scheme that came up with how we're going to regulate water in the state, groundwater pumping, because it was depleting pretty fast back then. The Arizona Groundwater Management Act created the Arizona Department of Water Resources, which, as I briefly mentioned before, is kind of the big dog in regulating water use in the state of Arizona. The groundwater law in the state of Arizona is based on kind of creating forced conservation plans that was designed to place limits on groundwater use in the major population centers, basically from Nogales, kind of in a swath up to north of Phoenix, and then a little bit up into Prescott. If you look at this map, the green areas are active management areas, and the brown areas are irrigation non-expansion areas. So those are the areas in the state that are regulated under the Groundwater Management Act. If you're in an INA, the brown spots on there, basically what that kind of area is no more new irrigated agriculture as of 1980 can be initiated. No, there's no new farms, no expansion of water use in agriculture, and that's essentially the end of the restrictions in those areas. Active management areas are the big area that are regulated the most in the state and by the ADWR. Same thing as an INA and an AMA, which is there can be no new irrigated agriculture since about the 1980s. But there's also the state is also placing pumping limits on agriculture. It's kind of slowly forcing reductions that you can't pump more than a certain amount, and it's based typically on how many acre feet per acre you can pump of groundwater to supply irrigation. Every year they say maybe a little bit less, a little bit less. The other thing is that when it comes to active management areas, if you have a well, you're going to have certain water rights that are associated with that well, and you'll hear terms like irrigated grandfathered rights or irrigation grandfathered rights. You'll hear type 1 rights, type 2 rights, things like that. Those basically are what landowners and farmers have that they can use to continue those rights to use to continue to supply water to their farms. Some farms go away, and those grandfathered rights that those farmers have can be converted to other types of rights, like industrial rights, or sometimes they're converted to golf courses. So golf courses can pump groundwater and continue to do so under a different type of right. The rights are typically associated with the land. So if you had a farm of 1,000 acres and you have a right to use water on that 1,000 acres of farmland, you can't typically move it to another farm area unless you convert the right, and it's a complicated process. Another factor in this is water transfers is another restriction. If you're in an active management area, you can't, in the state of Arizona, you can't move water basically between active management areas or between non-active management areas of just any part of the state and bring it into an active management area. The reason they did that is they wanted to prevent active management areas like Tucson and the Phoenix area from importing water from rural areas and harming rural interests. So where the big guy could really harm the Goliath could harm the David in that kind of a situation. So that's typically prevented in the state of Arizona. Each active management area, Phoenix, Tucson, Pinal County, Prescott, they all have different plans and goals. But the baseline goal for each of the active management areas is what's called safe yield. And so what safe yield basically means is the goal is let's not pump any more groundwater than is naturally recharged into the aquifer. So naturally or artificially recharged into the aquifer. Artificial recharge occurs when people, groups, organizations, municipalities take Colorado River water or effluent and recharge it into the groundwater aquifer, either through kind of a legal means or through actual physical means where they use injection wells and recovery basins, and the water seeps down or is pumped down into the aquifer. So the goal is safe yield. We want to make sure that we're not pumping as much more groundwater than is being put back into the groundwater basin, and that could also be through, you know, snow melt and streams and things of that such. Phoenix and Tucson are headed towards, they're working on plans. We're on the 5th management plan at this point for both to get to safe yield. Interestingly, the Pinal active management area in Pinal County area is their goal is actually depletion. It's actually to no longer have groundwater at some point to pump, but let's do the best we can. In the Pinal AMA, where the economy, this is a quote from the Department of Real Estate. In the Pinal AMA, where the economy is primarily agricultural, the management goal is to preserve that economy for as long as feasible, while considering the need to preserve groundwater for future non-irrigation uses. Pinal County is a mess. It's their wells are very deep, and they're in a world of hurt and basically slowly running out of water. But frankly, that was the goal. What about other parts of the state? So you've got the active management areas, and then you've got other parts of the state, say like Graham County, Gila County, Apache, these Yuma, these places that are outside of the green areas. Those are almost not regulated. So a large farm or you'll see large industrial farming operations coming in and punching groundwater wells and pumping thousands and thousands of acre feet of water out of the ground with almost no regulation. They have to apply for a permit to get a well. They're typically granted, and they can run these operations. Well, the ADWR and the legislature, and through an initiative process, you can create new active management areas, which just happened. The Douglas active management area down here in the southeastern part of the state used to be an irrigation non-expansion area, an INA, which was somewhat regulated, but not a lot. And they recently voted to become an active management area, and that was just last year. That was actually spearheaded by a grassroots push because of large industrial farming happening there and harming local landowners, kind of smaller guys, and making their well levels drop. And that was created by an initiative. So democracy can still work. The key, again, to groundwater regulation in the state of Arizona is where you are. So if a groundwater well issue comes up, or any kind of an issue comes up regarding somebody's pumping groundwater, the first question is always going to be, where are they? Are they in an active management area or an INA? And what regulations apply to where they are? If they're not in one of those areas, they're not going to be highly regulated. Briefly, have a quick kind of jump into municipal related water issues and groundwater law in the state of Arizona. So you'll see assured water supply, that phrase pop up now and then. What that basically means, and what the law says in the state of Arizona, is a developer cannot take a parcel of land, cut it up into a subdivision, and sell property in that subdivision to folks without proving they have a 100-year assured water supply. How do you get an assured water supply? They can either go directly to the ADWR and try to prove to them that they have that, and it's both a legal right and they have to prove that there actually is wet water too that they can provide. But typically developers are developing in cities. And cities have gone to the ADWR, municipal water providers, go to ADWR and ask for an assured water supply permit from the ADWR, and they grant it typically. And it's based on a lot of information: hydrology, studies, how much renewable water does the town have, etc. I could talk about assured water supply issues with municipalities for an hour alone or more. But what the towns will typically have, this is how many acre feet of assured water supply you have. Go ahead and allow development in your town, but if you reach that limit, you're going to have to stop development. Well, that's happened recently in Pinal County again, where they've run out of assured water supply, the water providers up there, and so there's very little more development that can occur. Now, you'll see houses being built because they were grandfathered in. The municipality, allowed the subdivision to be platted, and so they can still provide water to those subdivisions. But they're at their limit. The same thing is occurring a little bit in Phoenix. Phoenix is talking about that as well, that they're basically running out of assured water supply up there. So something's going to have to change. They're either going to have to find more water, which will be interesting, and they could potentially find it from agriculture, or the law is going to have to be changed. Long-term storage credits are another topic, and that's where towns take, or other groups take water like Colorado River water that they have in surplus, and they pump it into the ground, and they get a credit for that. And that credit allows them to pump it back out of the ground later. Those credits are actually, you can sell them. So towns will get these credits and transfer them to other towns. But that's a whole another legal thing we could get into for a long time. But you might hear these phrases now and then, and now you might know a little bit about it. But last, exempt wells. A lot of times you might hear something about exempt wells. Exempt wells are for domestic purposes, and basically houses in areas that don't have a municipal supplier can punch a well in the ground and pump water out. Exempt wells are limited, though. They're very, very kind of de minimis use. They can only pump up to 35 gallons a minute, which actually sounds like quite a bit, and it is if you've ever held a hose or a pipe with 35 gallons a minute running through it, but it's nothing compared to overall water use. There are irrigation districts that have wells that pump 3,500 gallons a minute. And it's pretty fascinating to see that, but that's the Arizona groundwater in a nutshell. Bottom line is its location. Where are you? Moving on to the next topic, which is surface water. Surface water law in the state of Arizona and in the Western United States is based on prior appropriation. In the Eastern United States, the primary surface water law rules come out of the theory of riparian rights, which basically means if you live near a body of water or adjacent to a body of water, you're allowed to use that water. In the Western United States, where we have a lot less water, we have the prior appropriation system. And the prior appropriation system is basically first in right, first in time, first in right, which means basically if someone diverts a stream onto their land and uses it to grow crops, and they were the first to do it, they have senior rights to all other folks in regard to the water in that stream, whether they're upstream or downstream. So someone diverts some water out of a stream, puts it in a ditch, and runs it onto a farm and irrigates agriculture. When they did it is critical, and the amount that they use is also critical to determining their right. So take that, multiply it by about 100,000, and you have Arizona. And I'll get into that in a little bit. Here's the rules regarding Arizona surface water law. What water are we talking about? This is a quote from the Arizona Revised Statutes. Basically, surface water is streams, water flowing in canyons or ravines, natural channels, in underground channels. So we're going to get into that in a minute. Whether it's perennial or intermittent, flood water, wastewater, lakes, ponds, and springs. Springs are also considered surface water. And they, under the law, they belong to the public and are subject to appropriation and beneficial use. What can you use surface water for? It has to be beneficial. You can't waste it. But beneficial use includes just about everything. Domestic, municipal, irrigation, cattle, to generate power, and wildlife and fish, and mining. So any beneficial use, you can pull water out of a stream and use it for that. Where can you use it? It is 100% pertinent to the land where it's being used. So if in the 1920s you pulled water out of the San Pedro River and put it on this 50-acre parcel of land, you can't move that right. It's very difficult to do. So that right to use that water on that 50 acres is stuck on that 50 acres. How much can you use? It's based on what you use. So whatever you use for beneficially for domestic, municipal irrigation, etc., what you used historically is what the amount is of your right. You can use it or lose it, however. So under the state of Arizona, if you don't use your surface water right for 5 years or more, and someone decides to sue you, or the state decides to pursue an action against you, you can forfeit or abandon that right. And you can also abandon a part of it. So let's say you're on the San Pedro, you got your 50 acres, you decide to change your crop type for 5 years, and you're using a lot less water, you may lose some of your surface water right. The problem with that idea, the use it or lose it idea, is it promotes, to some degree, it's an anti-conservation thing, and it promotes waste. Waste of water is illegal in the state. You can't waste, pump it out, do nothing with it, or pull it out of a stream and do nothing with it. But if you lower the amount that you use, you can lose that little bit of it, and your right is diminished to some degree. So what do people want to do? They want to keep using the amount they've always used, whether they're actually using it or not. Arizona in 2021, finally, they passed a law that says you can park your rights. You can file a conservation plan with the ADWR and say, I'm not going to use this amount, and you won't lose it. And so folks are starting to do that, but that was finally passed. And so there is some conservation now, and folks don't have to worry necessarily about losing their rights. How do you get a surface water right? Well, you file with the ADWR an application. You tell them where your diversion is, meaning where you're pulling the water from, how much you're using, and you prove to them you're actually using it for beneficial use, and they'll give you a certificate of water right. However, that certificate of water right isn't guaranteed. You're going to be subject to the general stream adjudication in the state of Arizona at some point, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute. Here's another little complicated factor in surface water rights. The saturated floodplain Holocene alluvium. What is that? What's the subflow zone? What that is if you have a well where you're pumping water near a stream, and that well is however deep it is, 200, 300, 500, and that has an effect, the depth of the well, you might be pumping surface water, and you're going to be subject to surface water laws. This is a messy area, and it's being litigated in the general stream adjudication right now. But generally you think of the surface water right as somebody's pulling water out of a stream and putting it on a farm. Well, they might be pulling it out of the stream using a well. So it gets pretty interesting. Let's talk about the general stream adjudication. The general stream adjudication is where everybody has their water rights. They got them from ADWR to some degree. Some people did, some people didn't. They're using surface water. Well, now how do you decide who gets what and what priority when more is being used than is in the river, as an example? Well, you file a lawsuit. And this lawsuit is called the General Stream Adjudication, and it started in the 1970s. That lawsuit is still going on. It will be going on for many, many years. It's one of the largest lawsuits in the history of the state of Arizona and in the United States. In the Gila River Basin, which the Gila River and all of its tributaries, there are 80,000 claims filed, and there are 24,000 litigants. But what the court has done is they take individual river basins and then adjudicate those. So they'll take the Verde Basin, for example. They'll take the San Pedro Basin. They'll take the Santa Cruz, in lower part of the Santa Cruz, and middle part of the Santa Cruz, and adjudicate those separately. Well, this all started in the 70s, but no basin has been fully adjudicated yet. Little Colorado River in up in kind of northeastern Arizona isn't getting there, and the San Pedro River is getting there as far as being actually adjudicated, and everybody's rights are, this is what you've got. But they're not. It's going to be probably 30 to 50 more years before this is all hashed out. Couple final notes on surface water issues that are just interesting. Colorado is really serious about their surface water rights, and prior appropriation is super serious. So much so that water harvesting in the state of Colorado is basically prohibited. You can water harvest up to like 110 gallons, have 110 gallons of storage of surface water. But boy, in Colorado, you better let that snow melt and rain that falls on your roof flow to the streams. It's actually pretty crazy stuff. Another note on just generally on surface water stuff is that there's scant resources to enforce it. And so folks are pulling water out of streams and probably shouldn't be, and it's not enforced because there isn't a whole lot of enforcement mechanism, and it's better to be upstream with a shovel than downstream with a lawyer is a pretty common phrase that you'll hear, because fighting for water rights, especially surface water rights, gets very expensive, and you'll be pulled into the general stream adjudication, and it's pretty crazy stuff. I'm going to move on. I'm going to probably try to get through this one pretty quickly. The next overlay of water in the state of Arizona and water law are federal reserve water rights. This is a layer of water law that's based on the supremacy clause. The federal government is supreme law of the land over states, that is over all of the water law issues, surface water, groundwater, that I just talked about. What is it? What it is it's a principle that comes from a 1908 Supreme Court case that basically says the federal government, when they create reservations like military bases or national parks or Indian reservations, reserved water rights, and it's implied. It doesn't even have to say that they reserve water rights. They reserve water rights back to the date when that reservation, that park, that monument, that Indian reservation was created. And the amount of water is not based on use, but it's based on what the purpose of the reservation is. So when the federal government creates an Indian reservation in 1900, the priority date for the rights that Indian reservation has to water is 1900, and the amount of water is whatever purposes the reservation was created. So municipal irrigation rights for Indian tribes, etc. So that's a whole nother layer on top of all of the state law regarding water rights. The bottom line, and another part of this is that the federal government is actually involved in the general stream adjudication, and so are Indian tribes. So when the rights to certain streams and groundwater is litigated, the federal government is involved in that. I could talk about the recent Supreme Court case, the Navajo Nation case, but I'm not going to get into that. That's a big area, et cetera. But at the end of the day, the federal government is involved in all of this, and their supreme law of the land has a lot of say in water rights. There's a lot of fighting, but not always. Most cases actually get settled when it comes to water rights. A lot of people get together and determine this is what I get and what you get, and they enter into agreements, and it works out. Couple final thoughts. First, it's most importantly, again, is where are you and what kind of water is it? Is it groundwater? Is it surface water? And one of the problems, again, that I mentioned is it could be both. If you have a well, you could be pumping surface water and not even know it. The ADWR is the big animal in Arizona. They're great, but they don't have a lot of resources, and they're the regulator. So if you ever have questions, you can actually call them and say, "This is what do you know about this? What's going on?" Another note is you've seen that Saudi Arabia scandal and exporting water. That's another topic we could talk about for a while, but Arizona is in a constant state of exporting its water. When they grow cotton, that cotton is exported internationally. It's exported out of the state, and it's essentially exporting water because they're pumping water out of the ground or out of a stream, growing a crop and sending it out of the state. The Saudi Arabia situation, where they're growing alfalfa in Western Arizona and I think Eastern Arizona as well, they're sending it to Saudi Arabia, but the Arizona does this and farmers do this and industry does this all the time. So it's more of a bigger question than just Saudi Arabia stealing our water. It's what are we going to do to conserve water in the state? I take the position that although agriculture is the big player, they're not the bad guy. We all need food. We all need clothes. Some good news. The Tucson Active Management Area is actually, and since 2009, has been at safe yield. We pull as much water out of the ground as we put into the ground. Well water levels in the city of Tucson and in the Tucson Active Management Area have actually gone up. Tucson is a model for water conservation, and we've done a good job. We should all pat ourselves on the back, pull out our grass and put in water harvesters and keep working, because Tucson is in a great spot and the only one in the state that's in a great spot. Nobody else is at safe yield. Phoenix is working on it. They probably won't get there, but we are there. Another good news. This is a fascinating slide if you look at it. Arizona uses the same amount of water, actually 3% less now than we did in 1957, even though the population has gone from less than 1 million to 7.5 million people. That's conservation at work. We've done a good job. So it's again, pat ourselves on the back. The state is doing a really, really great job. Last but not least, this is a bear and some butterflies, and looks like she's appropriating a spring right here, but her priority date is a little recent, so she's going to have a problem, I think, perfecting her rights.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michael.
You bet. Any questions? That's probably a lot of information in a short period of time for you folks, but the bottom line again is it's what kind of water is it and where is it? Where are you is the question when it comes to water law stuff, but I'm happy to answer any questions if I can, and we can go from there.
Awesome. Yeah, for sure. So thank you so much for that wonderful discussion. There's a lot more nuance even than I appreciated between water and electricity generation and water harvesting and all these other pieces. And this whole idea of wildlife and nature really only being listed under safe yield and beneficial use, but there's not like really a clear space for that. But as folks are typing questions into the chat, I do want to recognize anybody who's helped with our Spring Seeker program, because that program is actually, we are taking that information that you're submitting and we're providing it to the Forest Service so that they can verify whether anyone is still using the water rights. And if not, those water rights revert back to the Forest Service. So thank you for that.
Yeah, that's your Federal Reserve rights right there. It's great. And that's the work, boots on the ground work that Skyline Alliance is doing. It's excellent work.
Yeah, I'm so appreciative of we have more than 1,200 spring surveys that have already come in, which is, it's a huge number. In the chat, we've had a couple folks mentioning about some more data about Lee's Ferry and variability of water flows, and then some folks who are involved in the AMA conversion down in Douglas from the INA to the AMA. So that's pretty fantastic. But we do have some other questions that also popped in there. One is, are there any book resources that you would recommend for folks who want to learn more about water law?
There are tons of books. I would actually recommend starting, and I can share the screen again, which might make sense. I'll just tell you, there's really good websites. And I'll tell you, one of the best ones is the WRRC website, the Water Resource Research Center, which is right here in Tucson. And it's a program of the University of Arizona. So look, you can just Google up WRRC. ASU's Kyle Center on Water Policy is another excellent website. And they would have sources and books and articles and things that you could read. The ADWR also has a great website with lots of charts and lots of information. And if you're interested in the general stream adjudication, the Maricopa County Superior Court which is running the Gila adjudication, has excellent information you can click on, and it talks about the history, refer you to articles and things like that. I would start with the web.
Awesome. Very cool. Thank you. We had hopefully a relatively quick question about water rights, is whether the use it or lose it does that right transfer when a property is sold, or does the water right kind of reset when the property is sold?
So again, surface water, groundwater. So if we're talking about surface water rights, you have a farm with you pulled water out of the San Pedro, that transfers with the land when you sell the land. The surface water right goes with the land. And so it's if it hasn't been used for 5 years, 10 years or whatever, it could be gone. It also, there's a lot to that. There's a lot of nuance to that, in that somebody's got to do something about it. You don't just automatically lose it. If you let's say you didn't use it for 7 years and you started using it again, you're probably not going to lose it. But if after 7 years you haven't used it and somebody files something, requests that the ADWR do something about it, or files a lawsuit, then you could lose it. It's not automatic.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. We have an interesting question about an overlap. You have a critical spring, so surface water is going dry because of a recently drilled well, which has the priority right in that.
So a groundwater well is pulling surface water down. Well, is it a surface water well?
Gotcha. Okay.
This is the problem that the adjudication court is dealing with right now in the San Pedro adjudication. They're trying to figure out what wells are what. But if you have a groundwater well that's depleting a surface water supply, there's probably a strong argument to be made that it's a surface water well, or it could be both. Actually, wells can be classified as both, and they could be brought into a surface water fight that we appropriated the water before you did, and now you're reducing the surface water right, and here you go, lawsuits and lawyers.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thomas' question, can you talk about water access and volume allocated to mining projects? That might be more than we can get into, but yeah, just a little bit to start.
So a lot of the mining projects, probably a lot of them that I've looked at, and I don't have a lot of background in this, in mining, I'm more represent irrigation districts, is they might be getting cap water. There's cap allotments for mining companies. There's cap allotments for agriculture that can be transferred to mining interests. But again, if it's groundwater that the mine's pumping, where are they? Are they in an active management area? How regulated are they? Are they outside of that? If it's surface water that they're using, then it's the other users that are going to jump in and say, hey, you're stealing my right.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay, we have a question from Emily actually about our shared watersheds between Arizona and Mexico, and whether we can better use legal pathways for water conservation across that border area. So in particular, she says water flow over the border is affected by federal management of the boundary itself, is there an international approach we could use to ask for hydrological restoration in northern Sonora?
Yeah, there is, I believe, there might even be a treaty involved, like, for example, with the Santa Cruz River in regards to Santa Cruz is fascinating because it starts in the United States, flows through Mexico, comes back into the United States. And there's an international boundary organization, which I'm messing up the name, but yes, there are resources we could look at, and I'd be happy to talk offline, Emily, about that as well. Yeah, it's a fascinating mix. I mean, you look at the maps and things, and it's as though we're an island. Here's Arizona, but
Exactly.
internationally we're not. So, yep.
Gotcha. Okay, awesome. So we had a question about the recent Supreme Court decision and the Sackett ruling, and I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit about that and how or if it's changed things here in Arizona.
I have reviewed the Sackett ruling, but I'd have to actually pull that up to take a look at it. I don't know if that's there's been two rulings recently. One was a Waters of the United States related ruling. That might be Sackett. The other one was the Navajo case that the Navajo tribe was trying to force the federal government to protect the Navajos' rights.
We actually had questions on both of those.
That would be worthy of a whole nother coffee break that I'd be willing to research those cases and talk about them a bit. But the Waters of the United States case WOTUS is something that is going to change all the time, and it changes all the time. And the Supreme Court jumps in and sticks their fingers in it and tries to change it as well. But and every time they try to come up with the rule, it's going to be litigated more and more and more.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, I, for one, will definitely hold you to your offer to do another coffee break. We've had a couple comments like that in the chat as well. It's like, this is worthy of a whole other topic. So
I could do a coffee break on each one of these topics that I covered. I was just in the beginning of August, went to a water law conference in Phoenix. It's 2 days that I covered basically they cover all this material in depth, but it's 14 hours. There's the Colorado River Water Users Association meeting, which is another 2-3 day conference in Las Vegas. That's the same thing. There's 20 hours on just the Colorado River and what's going on with that. So it's a huge area of law.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again for this wonderful talk. Michael did offer to share his email address. So if that's a true offer, we'll paste it in the
No,
chat.
it is. I'm happy to talk to folks about water stuff based on, depending on my ability and capacity. Pretty busy. Water laws it's a big area, and I jumped into it, like I said, about 10 years ago, and it's growing and growing. And so is my water law practice, basically. So.
Wonderful. Awesome. Well, thank you. I just wanted to thank everybody also for attending today. And thanks again to Michael for this talk. We will have a recording, and it'll be available on our website later today. And so you can follow up if you have any additional questions on that. Finally, we do have a lot of other events coming up. So if you'd like to join us in the field and actually do some hands-on restoration work related to water, most of our projects relate to water. So please feel free to check out our website and join us for some of those events. But I hope that you will all join me one more time in thanking Michael for his talk today and for his work on the Sky Island Alliance board. Thank you for everything that you are doing, Michael.
Yep. Thank you guys. I appreciate it. Sky Island is the best.
Wonderful.